Okay, listen, I know it's the first road trip of the season, and there's a lot more games to go, but seriously, Blue Jays? Seriously, guys? We lost this one to the Mets 3 games. Hey, at least we scored runs in games 2 and 3. Oh, bright side! Vladdy remains a Blue Jay. Welcome to Blue Jays game recap. Mets, Blue Jays. Let's get started. The Blue Jays are back, and right now, with the game having gone final, we are welcoming you in to Blue Jays game recap on the Sports for Beginners podcast. Now, let's go to your hosts of Blue Jays game recap, Thomas McGregor, Ali Musa, and Scott McGregor in the Sports for Beginners podcast studio. Take it away, gentlemen, because when the umpire says, "You're out," or "That's the game," or "Let's play ball," we know it's time for some baseball. This is Blue Jays game recap. Take it away, gentlemen. What's up, Blue Jay fans? What's up, Mets fans? My name is Scott McGregor. Welcome to another episode of Blue Jays Game Recap. Blue Jays taking on the New York Mets. They defeat the Mets. Well, actually, they don't defeat the Mets. The Mets get swept. The Mets swept them, I should say. They sweep the Blue Jays 3 games to 0. Blue Jays record as we speak with you right now is 5-5. Where they stand in the American League East is third place. They take on a Boston Red Sox team who is 6-4 starting tonight in a 4-game set against the Boston Red Sox. But they took on a team in the New York Mets, in which they came in to New York, into Queens against Juan Soto and company, who were 5-2. The Blue Jays were 5-2. Where were the New York Mets prior to this series beginning? Where were the New York Mets prior to this set of games beginning? Where were they at the start of this series? Where were they? Of course, this was a 3-game weekend set, and we're going to talk about it all the same way we kind of did with the Nationals, but let's first of all find out how the Mets got to where they are right now as they prepare for battle against their next opponent in the Miami Marlins, who they have played already. And we'll also touch on who's next for them as well a little bit later. So the New York Mets put the Miami Marlins into a extra inning game to close out the last time they played the Marlins in a 3-game set and take 2 out of 3. They also took 1 out of 3 against Houston to open the season, I should say. Winning 10-4 on March 31st and 6-5 on April 2nd, 2025. They also beat Houston 3-1 on March 28th after losing on opening day by that final same score, this time in Houston's favor. All right, so we know they were 3-3. They improve to 4-3. And then where they are currently at 6-3 with 3 victories over the Blue Jays. One was all you could say was shut out. And we'll get to the breakdown of these games in just a moment. Oh, but I was forgetting. We got to talk about who the managers are to keep things going the way that we did with the Nationals here on our show, and of course the way that we have done on the Orioles series as well. So it's Carlos Mendoza against John Schneider this time around. That is the manager of the New York Mets against the Toronto Blue Jays. John Gippens is your bench coach for the New York Mets. And he is the former, look it up, it's true, look it up. He is a former New York Mets player, but he's also one of the former managers of the Toronto Blue Jays. All right. So why don't we get things started, shall we? I think we shall. Why don't we get things started now that we've got the managers out of the way? And before we get into the game breakdowns, we'll get into those after the first commercial break of the show. At least the second and third game we'll get into after the first commercial break of the show. But before we get to the first commercial break of the show, let's remind you of our pitchers. To start, we start on Friday, which was April the 4th, 2025. This was the game the Blue Jays lost 5-0. They took on a pitcher by the name of Tyler McGill. His record was 1-0 going into this game. He improves his record to 2-0 on the season. ERA 0.87. Kevin Gausman got the start for the Blue Jays. His record 1-0 going into this game. He comes out of this game with an ERA 3.97. And his record improves to 1-1. Pete Alonso and, of course, Juan Soto. A couple of the factors in this one. Before we get to Game 1's breakdown, who else was pitching in this game, in this 3-game season series against the Mets? Well, in Game 2, which happened on Saturday, the Mets went with Griffin Canning, and the Blue Jays sent to the mound the Hound on the mound, Chris Bassett. We'll talk about how these pitchers did on Saturday and, of course, how the games went down on Sunday for both pitchers. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But we're going to get to game one in a matter of moments. Wrapping up here, though, of who started in each game. Bowden Francis goes for the Blue Jays in the finale against David Peterson. So everybody I mentioned during the Washington Nationals recap started these games. And right now we're going to get into game one of the Mets versus the Blue Jays. So let's go to it. As mentioned, it's John Schneider versus New York Mets manager Dave Mendoza. If I pronounced that right, I think I have that right. I'm just going to double check here on the MLB app to make sure I have the manager correct. Just double check that. Sorry, Carlos Mendoza. Sorry, it was Carlos Mendoza. That's who I was looking for. Carlos Mendoza against John Schneider. In case you missed that. Now the Blue Jays, as we are speaking to you right now, are getting ready for a 4-game showdown with the Boston Red Sox. We'll talk about the Boston Red Sox a little bit later. All right, back to business. Back to Friday. We go back to Friday. Our line score for this game, game one, for the Blue Jays, no runs on no hits, no errors. For the Mets, 5 runs on 4 hits, no errors. How did it go down? Here we go. Pete Alonso getting things started with his 3rd home run of the season, scoring Francisco Lindor. A 2-run shot for Pete Alonso in the bottom of the 1st inning gives the Mets a 2-0 lead. A 2-0 lead, to be more specific. In the bottom of the 6th, Juan Soto made it 3-0 Mets with his 2nd double of the season. Francisco Lindor once again scores on the play. Brendan Nemo, a batter later, scores Juan Soto. Well, actually, one batter later, because Pete Alonso was able to get on base. This would leave runners at 3rd and 2nd, but the Mets score Juan Soto on the play. Brendan Nimmo's 1st double of the season. Sharp line drive to right field. Scores another run. It's 4-0 Mets. Still bottom of the 6th inning we are. Starling Marte flies out to George Springer, who was in center field in this game. And Pete Alonso scores on the play. It's 5-0 Mets. That's right, 5-0 Mets. And that is what our final score would be. Some key moments included a George Springer triple in the top of the 2nd. Andres Gimenez striking out in the top of the 6th inning. An Alejandro Kirk strikeout also in that inning. and then that double by Juan Soto in the bottom half of the sixth. The Blue Jays were held off the scoreboard all 9 innings, but they managed 4 hits. Of those 4 hits, 2 of them belonged to Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and 2 of them, so both hits, 2 to Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who we'll touch on in a moment or so before the show is up, belong to Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and George Springer, with the other 2 hits. 4 hits for the Mets, 1 hit to Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, and Brandon Nimmo with the only hits in the game. Francisco Lindor also walked twice. Pete Alonso and Brandon Nimmo were also walked only once. So this was not a game the Blue Jays needed to win. Well, actually, it was a game that they needed to win, but they just did not put runs in place. They did not put runs on the board, and that's what you got to do. There's an old saying in sports, ladies and gentlemen. There's an old saying in sports: you cannot win if you cannot score, and if you cannot get hits in the game, you can't score runs if there's nobody on base, in baseball terms. One more thing here, and we'll get back on this when we go over Game 3 a little bit later. But our umpiring crew for this series was Gabe Morales at home plate, Emil Jimenez with the first base umpiring duties, Doug Eddings at second base, and Mike Munchlenski. Mike, if I pronounce your last name wrong, I tried to get it there. If I pronounced it wrong, I apologize. But those were your umpiring crew members: Gabe Morales, Emil Jimenez, Doug Eddings, and Mike Munchlinski. First pitch flew for the Friday game. First pitch flew for the Friday game 12 minutes after 3 p.m. Eastern, or rather 3 p.m. Central. I gotta double check here to see when first pitch was supposed to fly for that game. Oh, yeah, I had that right. So just 2 minutes after 3:10 p.m. Eastern, 2:10 p.m. Central, 1:10 p.m. Mountain, and 12:10 p.m. Pacific, when the game was supposed to start. Some breaking news we will get into that broke late last night, and we'll save that for after our breakdown of the game for game number 3. But that's breakdown number 1, along with our managers and pitching matchup, or as it would be called in Blue Jay Central, our meeting on the mound. So when we return to Blue Jays game recap, we move from Friday to the weekend games, Saturday and Sunday, as this 10-game road trip continues. 4 games in Boston starting tonight at the time of our recording, 3 games in Baltimore starting this Friday. In Baltimore, as another Battle of the Birds begins. And we had 3 games to kick off this road trip in Queens, down at Citi Field in New York. We'll get to games 2 and 3 still to come. Game 2 is on deck. I should say game 2 is up next. Game 3 is on deck. In the hole is our players of the series. Also in the hole, we've got my thoughts on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. signing. Guess what? He's going to stay a Blue Jay. Now, there is a pending physical, and we'll talk about that later on in our show. Also in the hole, as I mentioned, we've also got our upcoming season series, the 2 series we will be looking at for the Mets and the Blue Jays. We mentioned one of those series for both teams that we will be looking at a little bit later in our show, and our players of the series will happen before that. And then it's time for On Deck on Blue Jays game recap next time. That will close out the show. But first, a quick word from our friends over at Broadcast Map and Sienna T Radio. And then, off to Saturday's game. How did that end up as close as you could get, even if you talk about close games, including Sunday's game? The Mets beat the Blue Jays 5-0 on Friday. What were the final scores Saturday and Sunday? Find out next on Blue Jays Game Recap. When we continue, stay with us.
Looking for conversations on the world of broadcasting, sports media, and from time to time, my favorite sports teams? Listen to Broadcast Map with me, Ali Musa. To learn more about the show and to view the upcoming schedule, like the Broadcast Map Facebook page. Search Broadcast Map.
Sienna T Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down, nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on Sienna T Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on Sienna T Radio.
Welcome back to Blue Jays Game Recap, Blue Jays and the Mets. My name is Scott McGregor, your host of the program here. I know that it's been saying Penguins, like on the bottom side, it's been saying the host of Penguins post-game. But this is actually Blue Jays Game Recap. And our topic of conversation is Mets and Blue Jays. So there we go. I quickly changed that up there for a moment. All right. We talked about game 1. We've talked about the managers, Carlos Mendoza, John Schneider. We talked about the pitchers starting. Those guys starting on the mound. We talked about those guys starting on the mound. That we did talk about. Let's talk about the matchup between our second matchup for the Blue Jays and Mets. That featured Chris Bassitt and Griffin Canning. We'll get to the stats a little bit later during our players of the series. But to keep things going for us right now, let's talk about the game. We talked about the umpires earlier. I'll get to the attendance records for all 3 games later in the show if we have time. But let's just get this show on the road and keep things rolling. This was a night game at 7:10 p.m. was the start. From Citi Field in New York. Shout out to our New York listeners up there in Western New York, especially if you listen to the Buffalo Bills. Shout out to all our friends out there in Buffalo, New York. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll talk about some Buffalo stuff a little bit later. Maybe not on this show, but definitely on a future episode of Sports for Beginners, so stay with me for that. Let's kick off our Game 2 recap with a look at our line score before we get into the summary, and in particular, our scoring. So our line score for this one, for the Blue Jays kicking things off, 2 runs, 10 hits, no errors. For the Mets, 3 runs, 8 hits, no errors. Winning pitcher is not the starter of this one. It is Edwin Diaz. His record 1-0 on the season. ERA 0.00. The loss to Nick Sandlin, his record 0-1, ERA 2.25. And our starting pitchers for this one, Griffin Canning went 4 innings, giving up 4 hits, 1 run earned, walked 3 of the Blue Jays, struck out 6 of them, ends the game with an ERA 2.79. We also saw some other pitchers, notable pitchers for the Blue Jays that we saw after the outing from Chris Bassitt, which went into the 7th inning, but almost completed the 7th inning. Chris Bassitt went 6 2/3 innings, giving up 4 hits, did not walk a batter, struck out 9 New York Mets in this one. He ends the day with an ERA 0.71. Notable pitchers for the Blue Jays in this one. Jimmy Garcia, 1/3 of an inning. He completed the 7th inning of work for Chris Bassitt and would not pitch in the 8th inning. Gave up 2 hits, 2 runs, walked 1 batter. Sorry. He gave up 1 hit and 1 walk, did not strike out anybody. Brandon Little, who came into the game, finishes with an ERA of 5.79. And of course, Jimmy Garcia with no ERA, 0.00. Nick Sandlin with the ERA of 2.25. He and Brandon Little both go 2 innings, 2/3 of an inning. Brendan Little gave up 2 hits, 2 runs, both earned, walked a batter, and struck out a batter. Same thing with Nick Sandlin, he only gave up 1 hit in 2/3 of an inning of work. Jeff Hoffman, coming into the game, does not strike out a batter, nor does he walk a batter, but he ends the day going 1/3 of the inning, wrapping up the 9th inning. Finishes off the game with an ERA of 2.08. Blue Jays did not allow any home runs in this game. Struck out 11 New York Mets, the Blue Jay pitchers did. Walked 3 of the Mets, allowed 3 runs, and 8 hits. Pitching a complete 8 2/3 innings when you total all the pitchers. The New York Mets pitch a complete 9 innings with Edwin Diaz finishing off the game in the 9th inning. He goes into the game, strikes out 3 Blue Jays, gives up 2 hits in the process. Pitcher in the second game as well, Hauskar Barazoban. I'll go with HB. I might not have been able to say that name right, so apologies in advance. 2 1/3 of an inning, he goes with 1 hit given up and 1 strikeout. 3 hits given up by the first pitcher out of the pen, which is Jose Butto. Jose Butto, who went an inning and 2/3, 3 hits given up, 1 strikeout, 1 walk, 1 earned run. And of course, Griffin Canning, 4 innings of work, 4 hits given up, 1 run earned, 6 Ks, 3 walks. His ERA once again, 2.79. All right, your summary for this game. We start in the top of the 5th inning. In this one with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. singling on a ground ball to score Blue Jays rookie Alan Rodin. Bo Bichette goes to second base on the play. Toronto opens up with the lead in this one. In the top of the 6th, the Blue Jays grab this 1-0 lead and make it 2-0 as Bo Bichette picks up his 3rd double of the season to score Alan Rodin in the top of the 6th inning. Blue Jays up 2-0 through 6 innings of play. Bottom of the 8th, and guess what? Francisco Lindor walked it off in the bottom of the 9th with a sacrifice fly to Miles Straw. Jose Siri scores on the play. But just before that, in the bottom of the 8th, Jesse Winneker hits his 2nd triple of the season to score Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto to tie it up in the bottom of the 8th at 2-2. And then it's Francisco Lindor with a sacrifice fly to walk it off in the bottom of the 9th. for the New York Mets. And the Mets will take this one 3-2 was our final on Saturday. All right, game number 3 coming up real quick. It's coming up real soon. Also coming up on Blue Jays game recap, which is on deck. My early thoughts on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. getting signed. You'll get the deal as well. And then it's time for players of the series in the hole and still to come. Who's pitching for Toronto and who's pitching for the Mets against their respective series that start today against Miami and Boston? And of course, who else is on deck for the Mets and the Blue Jays? You'll find out those 2 games, as well as what's on deck next time on Blue Jays game recap. But in case you missed it on the Orioles and the Nationals series, our coverage on Sports for Beginners of Blue Jays game recap, Boston versus Toronto, will not kick in until the series at the end of the month of April. It will kick in when the Blue Jays are in a 6-game homestand where they will welcome in the Boston Red Sox and the Cleveland Guardians. We will, however, be with you for the weekend series between Baltimore and Toronto. So just a quick programming note there before we take a break. And speaking of taking a break, we will take one right now when we continue on Blue Jays game recap. As close a game as you could get it, and something happened with the Blue Jays late that night after the game. What was it? How did the game go down? Who are our players of the series? Were there any errors at all in this series? So far, it doesn't look like it. We're going to find out if we had any errors in the third and final game between the Mets and the Blue Jays. And of course, I understand a hit from Ernie Clement was foul, but it looked like a home run and the Blue Jays were going to get on the board in that shutout game when they got shut out 5-0 on Friday. Though I would hate to see a call get made wrong, if this was indeed a foul ball, which it was, it is what it is. We break down the final game of the Mets and the Blue Jays. 3-game set, as they will not play the Mets for the rest of the 2025 season. After this series has wrapped up, which it just did last night. However, they will be playing the New York Yankees. And we'll get to all of that coming up real soon as we close down the show. My thoughts on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. signing with the Blue Jays and the Game 3 breakdown and players of the series when Blue Jays game recap continues. Stay with us.
Take another look with Gerda Felix and Melanie Taddeo Malo. Two powerful women of diverse backgrounds having genuine, unique, and uncomfortable conversations that everyone needs to have. Join Melanie and Gerda for conversations about what is missing from human connections.
CNT Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down. Nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on CNT Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on CNT Radio.
I wonder if I could make it. It's almost getting to 8 o'clock p.m., and I am still a few more steps away from home to get to my computer to listen to CNT Radio's Cosmopolitan Culture Club. The best of the best music from around the world. Can't wait! I think I made it! CNT Radio, making your day brighter, one song at a time.
Welcome back to Blue Jays Baseball. Blue Jays and the Mets. Welcome back to Blue Jays Game Recap. Blue Jays and Mets. 2 games in the books. Let's get into game number 3. Blue Jays have already lost twice. We're almost up to date with where they sit right now at 5-5. We're almost up to date where they sit at 5-5, and the Mets are sitting at 6-3 right now. We're almost up to date. One more game to go. At this time, the Blue Jays and the Mets, after Saturday's game, the Mets were 5-3. Blue Jays were 5-4. Uh-oh, we're trending downward. The Blue Jays are trending downward. Well, looking to avoid the sweep in Queens? Unfortunately, not to be. The Mets also win this one. Your final score, however, is a bit closer than expected. Mets beat the Blue Jays 2-1, and here's how it began. So Bowden Francis gets the loss. However, the starter, who went 4 2/3, did not wind up with the win. It was the first man out of the box, out of the bullpen, not the box, out of the bullpen. Max Koranic. Hopefully I've said that right. Apologies if I did not. His record is 1-0, no ERA for him. Bowden Francis's record 1-1, ERA 3.18. The save goes to the man who picked up the win in Saturday's game, Edward Diaz. His second save of the season. ERA, zeros on the board. All right, we'll get to all the pitching statistics in game number 3 in a little bit, but here's our rundown before we get to the scoring of how it all happened. The Mets do score twice in the bottom of the third, and of course the Blue Jays only score in the fifth. Here's how it went down. Starting things off this time around for the New York Mets, we're going to start off with the Mets and then go to the Blue Jays. Mets, 2 runs on 7 hits, no errors. For the Blue Jays, 1 run on 4 hits, no errors. No errors for this series between the Blue Jays and the Mets committed, which kicked off in our scoring with Pete Alonso getting things started, scoring Hayden Senger with the score. 1-0 Mets, bottom of the third. Brandon Nimmo also scoring a run here. Juan Soto scores on Brandon Nimmo's sacrifice fly. 2-0 Mets. Top of the fifth. The bases are loaded, and guess what? Andres Jimenez is hit by a pitch, and that walks in Tyler Heineman. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who was at second base at the time, is on his way to third. Anthony Santander went to second base. Andres Jimenez will take his place at first base. 2-1 the final score, and that's how it all went down. Bottom of 3 and top of 5th. All right. Time now for a little. I was going to go over our Bucks score for the pitching matchups, but we talked about it a couple of times already. We talked about it already in game 2. We talked about it in game number 1 as well, a little bit. So let's talk about. Let's go ahead and talk about the surprising news of them all. But I also want to let you guys know that George Springer, during this series, George Springer was pinched run for. Well, actually, he pinched run for Alejandro Kirk in the final game of the series. But Springer was hurt in this game. Okay, not in this game. Maybe in the second game. I got to remember when it was. But he did get hurt and had to leave one of the 3 games, I should say. So we really hope that George is. He's listed as day-to-day right now, but it could very well end up going on the IL if the need be. I don't think it's going to happen, but I really hope that George is okay. Because the last thing I would want as a Blue Jays fan, the last thing that I would want as a Blue Jays fan is to have to deal with that injury when I'm already dealing with Max Scherzer's injury as well. So we will see. On the brighter side of things, the talk is over we opened the season talking about it. They talked about it on Blue Jays Talk. They've talked about it on Blair and Barker, I'm sure. It's been the talk of pretty much any Blue Jays show you could find. But finally, now it is pending a physical, but finally, the chatter of will they agree on an extension or not? It can finally come to an end. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. will not be leaving the Six. Vladdy and the Blue Jays have agreed to a 14-year, $500 million extension. And this was some great news for Blue Jays fans to wake up to. Here's what Keegan Matheson has on the matter, and there is a video to it as well, but I'll leave a link to Keegan's post. As of 29 minutes after midnight, late Sunday night, at 12:29 a.m. Eastern Time, 29 minutes after midnight. There is a video to it, but here's what Keegan had to say, and we'll do this quickly before I get into some of my thoughts. A little bit of his article. He says, New York, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and the Blue Jays have agreed to a 14-year, $500 million extension, a source told MLB Network on Sunday night, immediately marking one of the biggest moments in franchise history. The club has not confirmed the deal which is pending a physical. The deal laps the field for the largest in Blue Jays history, blowing George Springer's 6-year, $150 million deal out of the water and resets the clock on this organization. Guerrero's contract drama has hung over the Blue Jays for years now, but that spotlight grew brighter when Guerrero arrived in spring training with a deadline of February 18th, the first day of full squad workouts, as a deadline for negotiations. A story of this magnitude does not go into hibernation, though, and it only grew throughout camp as numbers and valuations leaked out, often in Spanish language interviews from Guerrero himself. Finally, everyone can exhale. Guerrero represented the next great hope for baseball in Toronto when he debuted in 2019 as the number one prospect in the game. But with free agency looming at the end of this season and not a postseason win to show for this era, there was so much anxiety and pressure leaning on this season. Now we can finally, finally stop fearing the tragic ending and begin to look at the future of the Blue Jays again. Well, so I guess in short, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Now, the club has not confirmed this yet. It is pending a physical. So when we have the physical for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. done, all of this that I just brought up will be relevant. But he has a chance to live his lifelong dream as a Blue Jays member. Vladdy has a chance to... Mr. Guerrero has a chance to live out his lifelong dream as a Blue Jay forever. The deal is a 14-year, $500 million extension with the Toronto Blue Jays. So my question is, what does that do for the rest of the 162-game season? Now with the Mets series out of the way, as a 3-game series, which means, let's see, the Blue Jays have now played in 4 against Baltimore to open the season. Took 2 out of 4. Swept the Nationals. That was 7 games. So let's see, 8, 9, and 10. They've now played in 10 games, but they lost all 3 of those to Baltimore. And 10 games in, the Blue Jays are 5-5. In a 162-game season, right now, out of 162, the Blue Jays have played 10. So they now have 152 games left on the season. After the Nationals game, they had played in 7 games. After the Nationals series, they had played in 7 games this season. And we're at a record of 5-2. Which means they had, out of 7 games, they had at least 155 games to go. So now they have, as I mentioned earlier, they have played in 10 games with their first road trip underway of a 10-game road swing. They're down to 152 games to go. But it's only the beginning of the season. So a lot can still go on, even as we look forward to the All-Star break and the rest of the season. Personally, Blue Jay fans, I had a feeling before we came on to do this recap, this deal would get done. But again, like I said, it's pending a physical. So the club has not confirmed the deal yet. Maybe by the time I get out of here on this show, we will have a physical confirmed. But it is with really nice intentions that I say, I'm glad Vladdy got extended. I really am. I really am. Almost as glad as I was to see the Washington Capitals witness history yesterday in the National Hockey League. But you can hear about that on my Dallas Stars recap, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to talk about it on one of the 2 Chicago Blackhawk games that we do on Penguins postgame. But there you go. There are some of my thoughts on the action between the Mets and the Blue Jays and what transpired after it. way after the game. It's great to see that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. got signed. The deal is pending a physical, so we will wait and see when the team confirms. Meanwhile, we move on to awaiting the next series of games. With that said, we will do that. I'll provide you with my season series thoughts. And we will provide you with on deck for the Blue Jays, as well as players of the series. All that is coming up in these next 30 seconds when Blue Jays game recap wraps up on the other side. Stay with us. Looking for a good hockey podcast that covers your favorite hockey teams and mine? Check out On the Ice and Behind the Benches, where we chat about our favorite hockey teams from puck drop to the last play of the action. To learn more, follow the On the Ice and Behind the Benches Facebook page. Search On the Ice and Behind the Benches. Welcome back to Blue Jays Baseball. Blue Jays and the Mets. Blue Jays get swept by the New York Mets. It's time for some players of the series. Before we get into that, however, I want to let everyone know that we are working around to get to the last games of the season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins have, as we speak to you right now, they have been eliminated from playoff contention and will not, I repeat, will not be seeing the light of day in playoff baseball for the third consecutive season in a row. They have been eliminated from playoff contention, but that does not mean, regardless if it's old news, if it's still good news or not, it does not mean that our coverage of Penguins post-game is discontinuing, I should say, for the 2024-2025 season. No, it actually means that our 2025-2024 season is coming to an end on Penguins hockey coverage. We will get you a recap of Ottawa and, of course, Florida, as well as St. Louis's game. We will get those to you when we can. So please, 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 please be patient with us as we work this out. One of our upcoming programs on the show includes Game 1 of 2 in a home-and-home series between the Chicago Blackhawks and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Be sure to catch that whenever you can. We will be doing another game of that one once we are done with the first game. Second game goes Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, for this year after the Penguin season is over. So go Leafs go for all those all those Leaf fans out there. Let us see if they can do what they haven't done in a long time. Go Buds go for the Maple Leafs. But that is just a quick update there on Penguins postgame. Chicago's home and home series, we'll get that all to you when we can. We'll get you the Florida game as well. Ottawa, St. Louis, we'll get those to you as well. We got you the Lightning and, of course, the Sabres game. All of those will be able to be streamed on the ice and behind the benches at later times, probably during the off season. We will get to as many of them as we can. So please do stay patient with us for those games as well. All right. Players of the series. Well, we're going to go with guys from game number 3. And for the Blue Jays, I'm going to go with Alejandro Kirk, one of the 4 hits for the Blue Jays in this one. I should say he had 2 of those hits. The other 2 hits belong to Miles Straw and Tyler Heineman. I thought Alejandro Kirk played really well as a DH, but he was pinch run for by George Springer. Hopefully George is okay. He came into yesterday's game to pinch run. And, of course, for the Mets side, I'm going to go to Edward Diaz. Didn't pitch very much. He only got 1 strikeout in the game. But was able to retire the Blue Jays. And this one was not a walk-off, as the Blue Jays fell behind 2-1 after a single scored Hayden Zenger. And then, of course, we got that point from Pete Alonso early on. Well, actually, we got the Pete Alonso, then we got I'm surprised this wasn't a key moment. I'm surprised this second part wasn't a key moment, the second run, which was a sac fly. I'm surprised this wasn't a key moment of the game. But it is what it is. Speaking of Pete Alonso, he is going to get the player of the series for the Mets for me. So we got Alejandro Kirk for the Blue Jays and Pete Alonso for the New York Mets. Those are the players of the series. My thoughts on the series: not at all Toronto Blue Jays baseball, but starting to look a little bit like Toronto Blue Jays baseball in games 2 and 3 on Saturday and Sunday. A bit closer, but you still lost the game. Once again, your final scores: 5-0 on Friday, 3-2 on Saturday, and 2-1 yesterday on Sunday against the Mets. The Mets beating the Blue Jays in all 3 of them. So they swept the Nationals, got swept by the Mets, took 2 out of 4, against the Baltimore Orioles. Another opportunity to take 2 out of 4 or 3 out of 4. This one's against Boston, which will bring us, as we are closing out the show here, from our season thoughts on the series, my season thoughts on the series, and of course, our players of the series, It will bring us to the closing moments. On Deck is coming up in just a little bit, just a few moments. But before we get there, Boston Red Sox start a 4-game series with the Blue Jays tonight at 6:45 p.m. Eastern, 5:45 p.m. Central, and if I'm not mistaken, what else is on there? What else is on there? Ah, yes. 3:45 Pacific Time, 4:45 p.m. Mountain Time. Meanwhile, they will also start a 3-game set with Baltimore on Friday at 7:05 p.m. Eastern, 6:05 p.m. Central, 4:05 p.m. Pacific Time, 5:05 p.m. Mountain Time. That series with the Orioles, which is from the 11th to the 12th, will get started at Friday night, on Friday night at 7:07 p.m. at 7:05 p.m. I should say. And it's set for April 11th to April 13th. The series that starts tonight between the Boston Red Sox and the Toronto Blue Jays is a 4-game series set for April 7th, 2025 till April 10th, 2025. 3 night games starting at 6:45 p.m. Eastern. 4:10 p.m. Eastern is the game on Thursday. And then before you know it, the Blue Jays will be back here in Toronto for a 6-game homestand as the Braves come into town Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Then the Seattle Mariners are in town before the Blue Jays hit the road for a 6-game road trip. All things considered. Before we get to On Deck for Blue Jays game recap here on Sports for Beginners, here's a look at the Mets' 2 games, two upcoming series games that we will be looking at. They will take on the Miami Marlins starting tonight, a 3-game series set to wrap up a 6-game homestand that is off to a great start. They will take on Miami in a 3-game series set starting tonight at 7:10 p.m. Eastern, 6:10 p.m. Central, 4:10 p.m. Pacific, 5:10 p.m. Mountain Time. Running from April 7th to April 9th, with a day game on Wednesday. They will take on the Athletics for 3 games on the road as part of a 6-game road trip, starting on Friday, April 11th, and finishing off on Sunday, April 13th at 4:05 p.m. Eastern, 3:05 p.m. Central, and of course, (1:05 p.m. Pacific and 2:05 p.m. Mountain. The first game, however, is at 10:05 p.m. Eastern, 9:05 p.m. Central, 7:05 p.m. Pacific, 8:05 p.m. Mountain. So Miami and the Marlins and the Athletics for the Mets are up next. The Blue Jays take on the Red Sox tonight. The Mets take on the Marlins tonight. Red Sox coming into this series against the Blue Jays are 6-4. Blue Jays are 5-5. Not going to really get into the pitching matchups. I know I said we were going to get into them, but I'm pretty sure on the Blue Jays game recap on the ice and behind the benches for the Boston Red Sox, should that be covered. The road trip there, should that be covered, will be announced on Thomas's show on the ice and behind the benches. I, of course, will be with you for the series against Baltimore when the Blue Jays battle the Orioles in 3 games. That will be our next Blue Jays game recap. Series starts on Friday. Series starts on Friday in Baltimore and wraps up on Sunday. We shall see where things go. 1 month in the books for the 2025 season. The Blue Jays spent that month at home, taking 2 out of 4 against Baltimore. All 3 against the Nationals, leading into the opening of the month of April. They were swept by the Mets this weekend. What happens this coming weekend when they play Baltimore? And what will happen in the weekday session? 4 games on the weekday schedule, taking on Boston. All right. With that said, my name is Scott McGregor. This has been Blue Jays Game Recap. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, for those of our Blue Jay fans out there, let's go Blue Jays. My name is Scott McGregor. We will see you next time, right here on Blue Jays Game Recap, for another episode of the Battle of the Birds. Our Boston coverage comes your way. Our Boston coverage comes your way when the Boston Red Sox are in Toronto. Peace for now. Thank you so much for joining us on Sports for Beginners, the podcast, for Blue Jays Game Recap, the after show on Sports for Beginners, the podcast, right after every Blue Jays game. To learn more about upcoming episodes, when they drop, and schedule, please visit https://sportsforbeginners0.wordpress.com. Follow the show on Facebook at facebook.com/sportsforbeginners87. Send us an email at sportsforbeginners87@gmail.com. Follow Ali, Thomas, and Scott on Twitter at Scott McGregor3, Thomas J, and ALI Musa. Follow Thomas and Scott on Instagram at SMC_87_ and TM_80 and TM00_. Thanks for listening to Blue Jays Baseball, and we hope to see you soon again. This has been Blue Jays Game Recap. Once again, the website is https://sportsforbeginners0.wordpress.com. Thanks for listening. And when it's time for the Blue Jays to play ball, there's only one chant Blue Jays fans will be using. Catch you later, baseball fans.